we start every single day with a sort of our little warm-up exercise. We call it the jargon of the day. We know how important it is to make friends with the jargon, especially at this time of year when it's IEP season. I was thinking about this last night, thinking, this is a really stressful time of year for me. And I'm sure it is for you too, between taxes and IEPs. Really, do they have to be in the same time of year? But they are. It's just one of those realities. But in any case, we need to make friends with the jargon. It's going to be really important at the IEPs. It's going to be really important anytime our child gets assessed or anytime we're sitting and talking with any kind of an expert or any person of authority on our child's team. They're going to use the jargon, and they use it for a very specific reason because it's so specific. So it's sort of like a shorthand for them. Well, we want to get to the point where we not only understand, but start to use the jargon. I know sometimes it seems like we've gone over to the dark side, right? 7 years ago, some of these terms, if somebody had said them to me, I would have looked at them and said, what are you talking about? And now I find myself using perseverate in a sentence. It's just scary, but it happens. Okay. But we do need to make friends with the jargon, and the best way to do that is the same way that we teach our kids, a little at a time, so that we don't get overwhelmed, right? So today's word is manding. We talk about this all the time on the show, and this is one of the first words you want to make friends with because it's going to be said a lot, and it should be said a lot. And if it's not being said a lot, chances are you're not going to get the results that you want to, especially with very young children and children who have not acquired language or have a deficit acquiring language. So manding, really important, because here's the promise that comes with manding. It's sort of the hand-in-hand thing with manding. If you can get manding going on a regular basis, the challenging behavior that your child is engaging in is going to greatly diminish. How woohoo is that? How exciting is that? You can get more language out of your child and decrease challenging behavior at the same time. A 2-for-1, woohoo, right? So we really want to know about manding. Okay, let's look at our actual definition for manding. The mand, I have to get on my very official for our actual definition. The mand is a type of verbal behavior that is controlled by a motivating operation, deprivation, or an aversive state, and is followed by specific reinforcement. The mand specifies its own reinforcer. Great, right? This is what we're usually faced with when we go and look up a jargon term. I am no closer to understanding what this means, right? That's why we always give you a somewhat easier, user-friendly working definition. So manding is requesting, demanding, or asking for something. So when a child says to you, they're reaching out their hand and they're saying juice, they're manding, okay? Manding isn't always vocal, by the way. If a child is pointing to something specific and requesting it, they're using the point to request, that is also manding. A child can sign and say more, that is manding. And a child can point to a picture, and that is also manding. And I bring that up because when we start to teach manding, it is imperative that manding start to happen and happen on a regular basis, and I mean hundreds of times a day. And if we can get a child so that they're manding hundreds of times a day, then that's when we're going to see challenging behavior diminish. Now, for some of our kids, where we have to start, right? It's all about where we start, right? And that isn't going to determine where we finish. But for some of our kids, getting to vocalization is really frustrating and really difficult. So we may not start there, right? Why make it worse if we don't have to? All we need to do is get manding on board. If we get manding on board, then we can work on the tougher stuff, right? So we want to make manding as easy and as gratifying as we can as quickly as possible. When therapists go in, trained therapists go in to work with a very young child who's engaging in a lot of challenging behaviors, and one of the first things that they look at is how often is this child effectively manding in a given day. And they might find that the child is manding 5 times a day. This is a huge red flag, because even a 2-year-old old should be manding a couple of hundred times a day, right? And if they don't, we're going to get challenging behavior, because the two go hand in hand. If you do not have the power to request what you want and get it, you're going to tantrum, right? It just makes sense. It's just logical. You would do it. I would do it. Of course, our kids are going to do it. So if we give them, if we empower them and teach them how to mand, and teach them that when you do mand, you're going to get the thing that you manded for, like that, boy, it flips a switch with our kids. It really does. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I've got a 14-year-old who doesn't mand, and I'm just going to guess that your life is hugely challenging, and I want to give you, a big air hug and say, it does not have to be this way, that you can teach manding to anyone. You really can. But it requires you being patient and making it a priority, and making sure that you're reinforcing. So we talk about this all the time, that when you start manding, you got to think of, what does the child already want on a regular basis? Start with something small, because once the child gets it, they're going to start manding for a whole host of things. But start with something that the child wants. If they absolutely, what's the thing that they're obsessed with? And that's the thing that you want to get out and teach them the way in which to request it. And you're going to have to make a decision about which direction you want to go. I think that in general, if the child is making noises already, and they're vocalizing, it's a good bet to start with a vocalization. If you've already been doing a little bit of echoics, if you can get the child to repeat something that you say or make a noise when you ask them to, you can start with the vocalization. If your child is making absolutely no sounds whatsoever, don't go there with manding. Start with making a sign, or a gesture, or pointing to a picture to get something. And you can prompt them through it. It's actually easier for those things than it is for vocalization. But if a child is making some vocal, you can go there. And it literally, we were talking about this the other day, if it's that your child loves chocolate chip cookies, you're not going to give a whole cookie every time, but you get the cookie out and you can hold up the cookie to the child and you look at the child and have the cookie right next to your mouth, and you point to your mouth and you point to the cookie and you say cookie, right? Now the child might go gaga, right? Any noise at all, and you go, good job, and you give a piece of the cookie. You don't have to give the whole cookie. We don't want to put them in sugar shock, right? Yeah, you might be thinking to yourself, well, but I don't want my child to endlessly be asking for cookies. You know what? Worry about that later. We give a small amount of cookie, and we're not going to turn them into, these roly-poly little children that have sugar issues, right? But we have to get manding on board. If it's a child that's made no vocalization whatsoever, but you know that they love chocolate chip cookies, again, you're going to get out the cookie, and it may be that you teach the child to point, and you prompt the child, point to the cookie. Yes, that's, asking for the cookie, and you give them the piece of cookie. Or you can have a picture of the cookie next to the cookie and have them point to the cookie to request the cookie. Or you can teach, I don't remember anymore, but I think that's the sign for cookie, that they can do this and then they get the cookie. The first couple of times that you're teaching manding with a specific object, it takes the longest. I always think about Annie Sullivan and Helen Keller, and how long Annie Sullivan must have, been signing word after word after word into Helen Keller's hand before Helen Keller finally got it. And once she did get it, oh, those gestures that you're making mean this, and when I do this, I get it. Oh, okay, let's learn another word now. And it's the same thing with our kids. It takes a while to get those first 2 or 3, and then boom, your child starts to get it, and they will start to engage with you more. It's a really exciting time. So don't get frustrated, don't get overwhelmed, but know that manding is important. Manding is requesting, demanding, or asking for something, and it can be gesture, sign, pointing to a picture, or a vocal request. But we need to see it hundreds of times and make sure that when they're asking for the thing, you're delivering it in the beginning.